On a busy downtown street corner, Marcus Thompson was just trying to get home to his 8-year-old daughter after another exhausting double shift at the warehouse. The last thing he expected was to see a well-dressed woman collapse right in front of him, clutching her chest and gasping for air. Without hesitation, he dropped his lunchbox and rushed to her side. As he performed CPR on the cold pavement, drawing curious stares from passing strangers, Marcus had no idea he was saving the life of Victoria Sterling, one of the wealthiest women in America. He was simply doing what felt right, what his late wife would have wanted him to do. When the paramedics arrived and whisked her away, Marcus quietly gathered his things and headed home, never expecting to see her again. But what Victoria Sterling did next would change everything for this struggling father who could barely make ends meet. The question is, how far would a billionaire go to repay a debt of gratitude? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the thin walls of the small 2-bedroom apartment at 5:30 in the morning, just as it had every weekday for the past 2 years. Marcus Thompson's calloused hand reached out from beneath the worn comforter, silencing the noise before it could wake Emma. In the grey, pre-dawn light filtering through curtains that had seen better days, he could make out the familiar shapes of their modest home, the second-hand furniture arranged with care, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter that he'd deal with later, and the refrigerator covered in Emma's colourful drawings that somehow made everything feel a little brighter. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, running his hands through hair that was showing more grey each month, despite his 34 years. His body ached from yesterday's double shift at the warehouse, and he knew today would bring more of the same back-breaking work. But as he heard Emma stirring in the next room, a soft smile crossed his weathered face. She was his reason for everything, his motivation to keep pushing forward when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush him. "Daddy?" came a small voice from the doorway. Emma stood there in her favorite pajamas, pink ones with cartoon unicorns that Sarah had bought her for Christmas 3 years ago, before everything changed. The fabric was starting to fray at the edges, but Emma refused to let him replace them. They were her connection to the mother she remembered in fragments and fading photographs. "Morning, sunshine," Marcus said, opening his arms wide. Emma padded across the cold linoleum floor and climbed onto his lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. For a moment, the world felt complete again. In these quiet morning minutes, before the day's struggles began, he could almost pretend that Sarah might walk through the door any moment, coffee in hand and that brilliant smile lighting up her face. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, smoothing down Emma's tangled brown hair that was so much like her mother's. "I dreamed about Mommy again," Emma said matter-of-factly, the way children do when discussing profound things that adults struggle to understand. "She was making pancakes, and she said to tell you not to worry so much." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Even in death, Sarah was still taking care of them both. "That sounds like something she'd say," he managed, kissing the top of Emma's head. "How about we make some breakfast? Not pancakes, but I think we've got enough for scrambled eggs." Their morning routine unfolded with practiced efficiency born of necessity. Marcus prepared a simple breakfast while Emma got dressed for school, their conversation flowing easily despite the early hour. She chatted about her upcoming school project on community helpers, how her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had complimented her reading, and whether they could afford to get a goldfish for her birthday next month. "We'll see about the goldfish," Marcus said. The same response he gave to most of Emma's requests these days. It wasn't a no, but it wasn't a yes either. It was the careful answer of a parent who'd learned to navigate between hope and harsh reality. As they shared their eggs at the small kitchen table, the same table where Sarah had announced her pregnancy 8 years ago, where they'd celebrated, Emma's first words, where they'd held each other and cried after the doctors delivered the news that would change everything. Marcus watched his daughter's animated face and marveled at her resilience. She'd been only 6 when Sarah lost her battle with cancer, yet she'd adapted with a grace that humbled him daily. The worn family photo tucked in his wallet seemed to pulse with memory as he reached for his coffee. In it, Sarah cradled newborn Emma, while Marcus looked on with the stunned expression of a new father. Sarah's eyes sparkled with joy and mischief, her dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders. The photo was creased and fading now, handled too often by fingers that missed what could never be replaced. "Daddy, you're doing that thing again," Emma said gently, her small hand covering his larger one on the table. "What thing?" The sad thinking. "Who thing? Your face gets all crinkled up." Marcus forced a smile. "Sorry, baby, just thinking about the day ahead." After walking Emma to school, a routine he cherished despite it making him late for work more often than not, Marcus caught the bus to Morrison Warehouse, where he'd worked for the past 18 months. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was. Steady, and steady was everything when you had a child depending on you. The other workers were decent men, mostly older, who understood the quiet desperation of supporting families on wages that never quite stretched far enough. The warehouse smelled of cardboard, dust, and industrial cleaning supplies. Marcus lost himself in the rhythm of lifting, sorting, and stacking, his mind wandering as his body performed the familiar motions. He thought about Emma's upcoming parent-teacher conference, the electric bill that was overdue, and whether he could pick up another weekend shift to help catch up on expenses. During his lunch break, he sat alone in the break room, eating a peanut butter sandwich and drinking coffee from a thermos that had been Sarah's. The other workers talked about sports, politics, and weekend plans that involved expenses Marcus couldn't afford. He listened with half an ear, more focused on the calculations running through his head: rent, utilities, groceries, Emma's school supplies, the growing stack of medical bills from Sarah's treatment that insurance hadn't covered. "You okay, Marcus?" asked Joe, a grandfather of 5 who'd worked at the warehouse for 15 years. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." "Just the usual," Marcus replied with a shrug. "Nothing that can't be handled." It was a lie they both recognized, but neither acknowledged. Pride was sometimes all a man had left, and Joe understood that better than most. The afternoon stretched endlessly, punctuated by the mechanical sounds of forklifts and conveyor belts. Marcus's supervisor, a decent enough man named Pete, approached him near quitting time. "Thompson, I've got some overtime available this weekend if you're interested. Double time on Sunday." Marcus nodded immediately. "I'll take it. Figured you would. You're one of the most reliable guys I've got. If anything better comes along, you let me know. You deserve more than this place can offer." The compliment warmed Marcus more than Pete probably realized. Recognition of his work ethic and character meant something, even in a job that felt temporary and insufficient. As the day shift ended, Marcus walked to Emma's after-school program at the community center. The program was free, staffed by volunteers, and populated by children whose parents worked multiple jobs or struggled to make ends meet. Emma thrived there, having made friends with kids who understood that sometimes dinner was cereal and that birthdays might be celebrated with homemade cake instead of store-bought. "Daddy!" Emma ran to him with the enthusiasm that made every difficult day worthwhile. "Look what I made!" She thrust a construction paper card toward him, decorated with glitter and careful 8-year-old handwriting. "World's Best Dad," it read, with a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. What's the occasion?" "Mrs. Patterson said we should make cards for people who are special to us. I made one for you and one for Mommy to put on her grave." The simplicity of her gesture hit him harder than any of the day's struggles. Here was his daughter, creating art to honor both the living and the dead, finding ways to keep their small family connected across the boundaries of loss. Their evening routine was as carefully orchestrated as their morning one. Homework at the U, kitchen table, while Marcus prepared a simple dinner, usually something that could stretch for leftovers, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, rice and beans, occasionally a whole chicken that could provide meals for several days. Emma never complained about their modest meals, having learned early that gratitude was more valuable than variety. After dinner, they would sit together on their second-hand couch, Emma curled against his side while he helped with any remaining schoolwork, or they read together from library books. These were the moments that made everything else bearable. The warmth of his daughter's presence, the sound of her laughter, the way she still needed him to chase away the occasional nightmare. "Daddy," Emma said one evening as he tucked her into bed. "Are we poor?" The question caught him off guard, though he'd been expecting it eventually. Emma was smart, observant, and couldn't help but notice the differences between their life and those of some of her classmates. "We don't have a lot of money," he said carefully, "but we have everything we need. We have each other, we have a roof over our heads, and we have love. That makes us rich in the ways that really matter." "I know," she said, with the wisdom that sometimes surprised him. "I just wondered if you worried about it." "That's my job to worry about," he said, smoothing her hair. "Your job is to be a kid, do well in school, and know that you're loved more than all the stars in the sky." After Emma fell asleep, Marcus would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and face the reality of their finances. The bills were spread before him like an accusation. Rent, utilities, groceries, the minimum payments on credit cards that had helped them survive the worst months after Sarah's death. He would move numbers around, robbing Peter to pay Paul, making calculations that never quite added up the way he hoped. Some nights, the weight of it all would threaten to overwhelm him. He'd sit in the darkness of their small living room, looking at the photo of Sarah on the side table, and wonder how she'd managed to make their struggles feel like adventures when she was alive. She'd had a gift for finding joy in simple things, for making their tiny apartment feel like a palace when she filled it with laughter and love. "I'm doing my best, baby," he would whisper to her photograph. "I just hope it's enough." But when morning came, he would rise again, wake Emma with a smile, and begin another day of quiet determination. Because that's what fathers did. They carried the weight so their children could run free. They made sacrifices look like choices, and they found ways to keep hope alive even when their own hearts were breaking. The photo in his wallet creased, and fading remained his anchor to better times, and his promise that somehow, someday, he would find a way to give Emma the life her mother had dreamed of for her. Until then, he would continue to be enough, her protector, her provider, her constant source of unconditional love, in a world that often felt too big and too hard for a widowed father trying to raise a daughter on wages that barely covered their basic needs. In the quiet moments before sleep, Marcus would sometimes allow himself to dream of better days. A time when he wouldn't have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying Emma new shoes, when he could afford to take her somewhere special for her birthday, when the constant worry about money wouldn't be the soundtrack to his every waking moment. But those dreams felt as distant as the stars Emma loved to count from their apartment window. Beautiful, but impossibly far away. The steady beeping of medical equipment filled the private hospital room as Victoria Sterling slowly emerged from the fog of sedation. Her first conscious thought wasn't about her company's stock price or the board meeting she'd missed, but about the stranger's hands that had pressed against her chest, keeping her heart beating when it had decided to stop. The memory was fragmented, the sudden crushing pain, the inability to breathe, then strong, gentle hands and a calm voice telling her to hang on. "Ms. Sterling, how are you feeling?" Dr. Patricia Williams, Chief of Cardiology, approached the bed with the measured steps of someone who'd delivered both miraculous news and devastating diagnoses. Her grey hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her eyes held the kind of compassion that came from years of seeing people at their most vulnerable. "Like a truck hit me," Victoria managed, her voice hoarse from the intubation. She tried to sit up, but the doctor's firm hand guided her back down. That's to be expected. You suffered a massive myocardial infarction, a heart attack. Without immediate intervention, the outcome could have been very different. Dr. Williams pulled up a chair, settling in for what Victoria sensed would be a serious conversation. The paramedic said a bystander performed CPR until they arrived. That person saved your life. Victoria's fingers unconsciously went to her chest, where she could feel the tender spots where compressions had kept her blood flowing. Do we know who it was? The paramedics didn't get a name. He helped them load you into the ambulance, then quietly left. Hospital policy is to report such incidents to our security office, but by the time they arrived at the scene, he was gone. Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed insistently on the bedside table. The outside world was already intruding, demanding her attention despite her brush with mortality. Dr. Williams frowned at the device. Miss Sterling, I need you to understand something. This wasn't a minor episode. Your heart stopped beating for nearly 2 minutes. You're alive because a stranger refused to walk away when he could have. But more importantly, this is a warning. Your lifestyle, the stress levels you maintain, the hours you work, they're not sustainable. Victoria had built Sterling Industries from a small family business into a multinational corporation worth billions. She was known for her 16-hour workdays, her refusal to delegate critical decisions, and her ability to outwork competitors half her age. The idea of slowing down felt foreign, almost insulting. I have responsibilities, she said weakly. The company will survive without you for a few days while you recover, but if you don't make changes, you might not survive another episode like this one. Dr. Williams leaned forward, her expression serious. You're 52 years old. Victoria, you could have 30 more good years ahead of you, but only if you learn to live differently. Over the next several hours, Victoria's hospital room filled with concerned executives, assistants, and board members. They spoke in hushed tones about market reactions, contingency plans, and the importance of projecting strength to shareholders. Victoria listened with half an ear, her mind repeatedly returning to the moment on the sidewalk, the feeling of strong hands pressing against her chest, the calm voice that had somehow penetrated her panic. We need to find him, she said suddenly, interrupting a discussion about quarterly projections. Find who? Asked Richard Chen, her chief operating officer and closest business confidant. The man who saved me. I need to thank him properly. Victoria, I'm sure he was just doing what anyone would do, Richard began, but she cut him off with a look that her employees knew well. How many people walked past me on that sidewalk before he stopped? How many saw a woman having a heart attack and decided it wasn't their problem? Victoria's voice grew stronger as she spoke. This man didn't just save my life. He restored my faith in humanity. I need to find him. Within hours, Victoria's security team had obtained the hospital's surveillance footage from the emergency department. The cameras had captured the ambulance's arrival, but provided limited views of the street scene. However, they managed to identify several angles that showed the Good Samaritan, a man in work clothes who appeared to be in his 30s, with kind eyes and hands that moved with confidence and purpose. Can we enhance this image? Victoria asked, studying the grainy footage on her laptop. We're working with the city's traffic cameras and nearby business security systems, replied David Walsh, her head of security. We should be able to piece together a clearer picture of what happened and possibly track his movements. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson was going about his normal routine, completely unaware that he'd become the subject of an intensive search. He'd returned to work the day after the incident, mentioned it briefly to Joe during lunch, and otherwise treated it as just another day. When Emma asked about the sick lady he'd helped, he simply told her that sometimes people needed help, and it was important to do what you could. Did she get better? Emma asked over dinner, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. I hope so, sweetheart. The paramedics took good care of her. Mommy always said that helping people was the most important thing we could do, Emma said thoughtfully. She said it's how we make the world a little bit better. Marcus smiled, remembering Sarah's endless capacity for compassion. She'd volunteered at the animal shelter, helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, and never passed a homeless person without acknowledging their humanity. Her death had been devastating not just to their family, but to their entire community, which had lost one of its brightest lights. 3 days after the incident, Victoria's team had assembled a comprehensive profile. Traffic cameras had captured Marcus leaving the scene, and facial recognition software had identified him through various databases. They knew his name, his address, his employment history, and even basic information about his family situation. Marcus Thompson, 34 years old, widowed, 1 daughter. David Walsh read from his report, works at Morrison Warehouse, lives in the Riverside Apartments, wife died of cancer 2 years ago, financial records show he's struggling but has never missed a rent payment or defaulted on any obligations. Victoria studied the expanded photographs her team had compiled. Even in the grainy security footage, she could see the character in Marcus's face, the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from hard work and harder times, but also a gentleness around his eyes that spoke of compassion and integrity. He has a daughter, she asked, focusing on that detail. Emma Thompson, 8 years old. Honor roll student at Riverside Elementary. Father picks her up from the after-school program every day. Something in Victoria's chest tightened. Not the dangerous tightness of another cardiac episode, but an emotional response she hadn't felt in years. Here was a man who'd saved her life while carrying burdens she could barely imagine. A widowed father working warehouse jobs to support his young daughter, yet he'd still stopped to help a stranger. "What's his financial situation?" she asked quietly. David exchanged glances with Richard before answering. Challenging. He's current on all obligations, but there's no margin for error. Medical bills from his wife's treatment, basic living expenses, childcare costs. He's making it work, but just barely. Victoria closed her eyes, remembering her own childhood. Her father had built Sterling Industries through sheer determination and 18-hour workdays, often at the expense of family time. She'd grown up privileged but emotionally distant from the man who'd provided everything except his presence. The idea of a father working multiple jobs just to keep his daughter fed and housed while still maintaining the moral character to help strangers struck her as both heartbreaking and inspiring. "I want to meet him," she said finally. "Arrange it." "Victoria," Richard said carefully, "perhaps it would be better to send a representative. A nice thank you note, maybe a gift." "No." Victoria's voice carried the authority that had built a business empire. "This isn't about corporate gratitude or public relations. This is personal. This man saved my life when he could have walked. Passed like everyone else did. I need to look him in the eye and thank him properly." Dr. Williams arrived for evening rounds to find Victoria sitting up in bed, looking more energetic than she had since the cardiac event. "You're looking better. How are you feeling?" "Like I have something important to do," Victoria replied. "Doctor, you said this heart attack was a warning, that I need to change how I live." "That's correct. What if the change isn't just about working less, but about remembering what really matters? What if saving my life wasn't just about CPR, but about reminding me that there are still good people in the world, doing extraordinary things quietly, without recognition or reward?" Dr. Williams studied her patient's face, recognizing something she'd seen in other survivors of near-death experiences, a clarity that sometimes emerged from brushing against mortality. "That sounds like the beginning of wisdom, Victoria. But remember, lasting change takes time and commitment." That evening, as Victoria's hospital room finally emptied of visitors and business associates, she found herself holding the patient identification bracelet they'd placed on her wrist during admission. The plastic band was uncomfortable and ugly, but it represented something profound. The moment when all her wealth and power had meant nothing, when her life had depended entirely on the kindness of a stranger who asked for nothing in return. She decided to keep the bracelet, not as a memento of her near-death experience, but as a reminder of the moment she'd discovered that heroes weren't mythical figures from stories, but ordinary people like Marcus Thompson who chose to act when action was needed most. Tomorrow, she would leave the hospital and enter a world that had been fundamentally changed by 30 seconds of human compassion on a busy sidewalk. She had been given a second chance at life, and she was determined not to waste it. The knock on Marcus's apartment door came at 6:30 on a Thursday evening, just as he was helping Emma with her math homework at their small kitchen table. He frowned, checking the time on the microwave clock. They weren't expecting anyone, and their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, usually called before stopping by. "Stay here, sweetheart," he told Emma, rising from his chair with the caution of someone who'd learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. Through the peephole, he saw a woman in an expensive-looking coat standing in the hallway. She appeared nervous, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, and Marcus noticed she was holding what looked like a handwritten envelope. She didn't look like a bill collector or social worker, but her presence still made him uneasy. "Can I help you?" he asked through the door. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Victoria Sterling. I believe you helped me on Tuesday afternoon downtown. I was hoping we could talk for a moment." Marcus's brow furrowed in confusion. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it immediately. Then the memory surfaced. The well-dressed woman who'd collapsed on the sidewalk. The heart attack, the paramedics. But how had she found his address? He opened the door, keeping the chain latched. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. How did you—" "Please," Victoria said, her voice carrying a mix of urgency and vulnerability that surprised him. "I know this is unusual, and I know you probably want to forget what happened, but I needed to find you. You saved my life." Marcus studied her face through the gap in the door. She looked healthier than she had lying on the sidewalk, but there was something in her eyes, a sincerity that convinced him she wasn't there to cause trouble. Still, he glanced back at Emma, who was watching from the kitchen table with curious 8-year-old eyes. "Just a minute," he said, closing the door to remove the chain. When he opened it again, Victoria Sterling stood before him with a grateful smile that transformed her entire face. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just homework," Marcus replied, still feeling off balance. "Please come in, though I have to warn you the place isn't much to look at." Victoria stepped into the small apartment, and Marcus saw it suddenly through her eyes. The second hand. Furniture arranged with care but showing its age. The stack of bills on the counter he hadn't had time to hide. The careful organization that spoke of someone making the most of very little space. But what struck Victoria most were Emma's drawings. Covering the refrigerator, bright splashes of color that brought life to the modest kitchen. "Daddy, who's the lady?" Emma asked from her seat at the table, her math worksheet forgotten. "This is Mrs. Sterling," Marcus said. "She's the person I helped the other day." Emma's face brightened with understanding. "The sick lady. Are you feeling better now?" Victoria's heart melted at the genuine concern in the child's voice. "Much better, thank you. And please call me Victoria." "What's your name?" "Emma Thompson. I'm 8 years old, and I'm in 3rd grade. Did my daddy really save your life?" "He absolutely did," Victoria said, settling into the chair Marcus offered. "Your father is a hero." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I just did what anyone would do. How are you feeling?" "You looked pretty bad there for a while." "I was bad there for a while," Victoria admitted. "The doctors said if you hadn't acted so quickly, I might not have made it. I came here because I needed to thank you properly." She reached into her purse and withdrew the handwritten envelope. Unlike the typed formal communications that usually bore her name, this letter had been written in her own careful script, each word chosen with deliberation. "This is for you," she said, offering the envelope to Marcus. "But before you open it, I want you to know that finding you has been one of the most important things I've ever done." Marcus accepted the envelope with hesitation, his calloused fingers careful with the expensive paper. You really didn't need to go to all this trouble. I'm just glad you're okay." As he read the letter, Victoria watched his face, noting the way his eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with what looked like discomfort. When he finished, he carefully folded the letter and set it on the table. "This is very generous," he said quietly, "but I can't accept this." Victoria had anticipated this response. The letter contained a check for $50,000, money, that could solve Marcus's immediate financial problems and provide security for Emma's future. But she'd also learned enough about Marcus Thompson to know that his pride might be as strong as his compassion. "Mr. Thompson, Marcus, you saved my life. That's not something that can be repaid with words alone." "It can be repaid with words," Marcus replied firmly. "Knowing you're okay, knowing you took the time to find me and say thank you, that's enough. More than enough." Emma looked between the adults, sensing tension she didn't fully understand. "Daddy, what's in the letter?" "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart," Marcus said, then turned back to Victoria. "Ma'am, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I didn't help you expecting anything in return. Taking money for it would make it feel like I was paid to care about another human being." Victoria felt a stab of admiration mixed with frustration. Here was a man who could clearly use financial help, yet he was refusing what most people would consider a windfall because accepting it would compromise his principles. It was both noble and heartbreaking. "What if it wasn't payment?" she asked carefully. "What if it was just one person helping another the way you helped me?" Marcus shook his head. "That's kind of you to say, but we both know there's a difference. You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Sterling, really." Victoria glanced around the small apartment again, taking in the careful way everything was arranged to maximize the limited space. The way Marcus's work clothes were neatly hung on a hook by the door. The way Emma's school papers were proudly displayed on the refrigerator alongside her artwork. This was the home of people who took care of what they had, who found ways to make less feel like enough. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Do you mind if I ask what you do for work?" "I work at Morrison Warehouse," Marcus replied. "It's steady work, good people. And Emma, you're in 3rd grade? Do you like school?" "I love school," Emma answered enthusiastically. "My teacher says I'm really good at reading, and I want to be a doctor when I grow up so I can help sick people like my daddy helped you." Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Not the dangerous tightness of cardiac distress, but an emotional response she hadn't experienced in years. This child, living in a small apartment with a father who worked warehouse jobs, dreamed of becoming a doctor. The innocence and hope in Emma's voice made Victoria remember her own childhood dreams before corporate responsibilities had consumed her life. "That's a wonderful goal," Victoria said. "Doctors help a lot of people. My mommy wanted to be a nurse," Emma continued, "but she got sick and went to heaven. Daddy says she's still helping people, just in a different way now." The simplicity of the explanation, delivered without self-pity or dramatic emphasis, hit Victoria harder than any business negotiation ever had. Here was a family that had faced genuine tragedy, yet maintained their capacity for hope and generosity. Marcus had lost his wife and was struggling to provide for his daughter, yet he'd still stopped to help a stranger without hesitation. "Emma," Marcus said gently, "why don't you finish your math worksheet while Mrs. Sterling and I talk?" As Emma returned to her homework, Victoria leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Marcus, I understand your reluctance to accept help. I respect it, actually. But please understand something. You gave me the most precious gift anyone could give. You gave me my life back. Letting me express my gratitude isn't about charity. It's about completing a circle of kindness." Marcus looked at his daughter, bent over her math problems with the same concentration her mother had brought to everything she did. He thought about the bills on the counter, the grocery budget that never quite stretched to the end of the month, the dreams he had for Emma's future that seemed as distant as the stars she loved to count. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Victoria, smiled, recognizing the first crack in his resistance. That's all I ask. Think about it. And Marcus, thank you for everything. Victoria returned 3 days later, this time carrying a leather portfolio instead of an envelope. She'd spent those intervening days thinking about Marcus Thompson and his family, finding herself distracted during board meetings and conference calls by memories of Emma's bright smile and Marcus's quiet dignity. The more she learned about their situation through discreet inquiries, the more determined she became to find a way to help that wouldn't wound his pride. When Marcus opened the door this time, he looked less surprised but equally cautious. Emma appeared behind him almost immediately, her face lighting up with recognition. "Victoria, did you come back to visit us?" "I did," Victoria said, crouching down to Emma's level. "I brought you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I hope it's okay," she said to Marcus, who nodded with resigned amusement. Emma tore open the wrapping to reveal a beautiful hardcover book about marine biology, filled with colorful photographs of ocean creatures. "Wow, thank you. Daddy, look at all the fish." "That's very kind of you," Marcus said, though Victoria could hear the underlying concern in his voice. He was already worried about reciprocating such generosity. "I remembered you said you wanted to help sick people," Victoria explained to Emma. "Marine biologists help sick ocean animals. I thought you might like to learn about them." As Emma settled on the couch with her new book, Victoria turned to Marcus. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you said regarding charity and payment." "Mrs. Sterling, Victoria, please. And I think I understand your position better now. You're right that what you did shouldn't be treated like a transaction." She opened her portfolio and withdrew a document. "So I'd like to propose something different." Marcus accepted the papers with the same careful attention he'd given her letter. As he read, Victoria watched his expression change from wariness to confusion to something that might have been hope. "A job," he said finally. "Not just any job, a position at Sterling Industries as facilities coordinator. It's a real position, with real responsibilities, overseeing maintenance, safety protocols, building operations across our main campus. The salary is $65,000 a year, plus health insurance, dental, and a retirement plan." Marcus stared at the job description, reading it twice to make sure he understood correctly. The salary alone was more than double what he made at the warehouse, and the benefits package included things he'd never been able to afford for Emma. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "What qualifications do I have for this kind of work?" Victoria had anticipated this question. "More than you might think. You've worked in warehouses, which means you understand logistics and safety requirements. You have mechanical aptitude. I saw that when you worked on Emma's broken bike chain the other day." Marcus looked up sharply. "You saw that?" Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I may have driven by once or twice. I wanted to make sure you were both okay." She cleared her throat. "The point is, you have problem-solving skills. You're reliable and you understand how buildings and systems work. Most importantly, you care about doing things right." "But why?" Marcus asked. "Why go to all this trouble? There must be hundreds of qualified candidates." "Because," Victoria said, choosing her words carefully, "I've spent most of my adult life surrounded by people who are qualified on paper but lack something essential. You have that something. You have integrity, compassion, and the kind of work ethic that can't be taught." Emma looked up from her book. "Daddy, what's a facilities coordinator?" "It's someone who helps take care of big buildings," Marcus explained, still staring at the job offer. "Make sure everything works properly and people are safe." "Like a superhero for buildings," Emma said with 8-year-old enthusiasm. "That sounds perfect for you, Daddy. You're always fixing things." Victoria smiled at Emma's assessment. "She's absolutely right. That's exactly what the job is." Marcus set the papers on the coffee table and ran his hands through his hair. "This is incredibly generous, but I need to ask, what happens if it doesn't work out? If I'm not good at this kind of work, then we figure it out together." Victoria said simply. But Marcus, I didn't build a multi-billion-dollar company by making bad decisions about people. I know talent when I see it, even if it comes in an unexpected package. The Sterling Industries employee handbook sat on top of the job offer, its pristine cover a stark contrast to the worn furniture around them. Victoria noticed Marcus's eyes lingering on it, and she could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating possibilities, weighing risks, trying to determine if this opportunity was too good to be true. Can I ask about the work environment? Marcus said. I've never worked in a corporate setting before. It's different from what you're used to, Victoria admitted. More meetings, more paperwork, more politics. But the core of the job is practical. Solving problems, managing resources, making sure people have what they need to do their work effectively. I think you'd be surprised how much your current experience translates. Emma had wandered over to them, still clutching her marine biology book. Victoria, do you have fish in your office? No fish, Victoria laughed, but we have a beautiful atrium with plants and a small waterfall. Would you like to see it sometime? Could we? Emma asked, turning to her father with pleading eyes. Marcus looked between his daughter and Victoria, seeing something in the older woman's face that he hadn't noticed before. A loneliness that expensive clothes and corporate success couldn't hide. Victoria Sterling might be one of the wealthiest women in America, but she was also someone who'd taken time out of her incredibly busy schedule to buy a book for a child she barely knew. What about Emma? Marcus asked. My current schedule works, because I can pick her up from the after-school program. This position, would the hours be different? We have an excellent on-site childcare facility, Victoria said, and flexible hours for parents. You could start at 7 and be done by 3:30 if that works better for your family. The practical benefits of the offer were overwhelming. Better pay, health insurance, a more predictable schedule, opportunities for advancement, everything Marcus had hoped for but never dared to expect. Yet something held him back, a voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like his father warning him that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. I'm going to need time to think about this, he said finally. Of course, Victoria said, standing to leave. Take all the time you need, but Marcus, this isn't charity, and it's not payment for what you did. This is me recognizing that you're exactly the kind of person I want working for my company. The fact that you saved my life just helped me realize it sooner. As she prepared to leave, Emma tugged on Victoria's coat. Thank you for the book, and thank you for giving Daddy a chance to be a building superhero. Victoria knelt down and hugged Emma gently. Thank you for sharing your daddy with me that day on the sidewalk. He's pretty special. After Victoria left, Marcus sat on the couch, with Emma, both of them looking at the job offer spread across their coffee table. The employee handbook seemed to glow with possibility, representing a world so different from their current life that it felt almost fictional. What do you think, sweetheart? Marcus asked. I think Victoria is nice, Emma said thoughtfully, and I think Mommy would want you to take the job. She always said good things happen to good people, but sometimes you have to be brave enough to say yes. Marcus pulled his daughter close, marveling once again at her wisdom. Maybe it was time to be brave enough to say yes to something better. That evening, Marcus prepared a simple dinner of mac and cheese and green beans, while Emma worked on her homework at the kitchen table. The job offer documents lay beside her school papers, and she kept glancing at them with the intense curiosity of a child who sensed something important was happening. Daddy, she said as she worked on a worksheet about community helpers, why are you scared about the new job? Marcus paused in stirring the pasta, surprised by her directness. What makes you think I'm scared? You get the same face when you're scared as when you're thinking really hard, Emma explained matter-of-factly, like when the doctor said I needed shots, or when the car made that funny noise last month. He marveled at his daughter's perceptiveness. At 8 years old, she could read his emotions better than most adults he knew. I guess I am a little scared, he admitted. It's a big change. and I want to make sure it's the right thing for both of us." "What would Mommy say?" Emma asked, the question she posed whenever they faced difficult decisions. Marcus set down the wooden spoon and leaned against the counter, letting himself remember Sarah's voice. She'd always been the optimist in their relationship, the one who encouraged him to take chances while he preferred the safety of familiar routines. "You know what she'd say," he said with a soft smile. "She'd tell me that good opportunities don't come around very often, and when they do, you have to be brave enough to grab them." After dinner, Marcus walked to the small cemetery on the outskirts of town where Sarah was buried. It was something he did when big decisions loomed, not because he believed she could somehow answer him, but because talking to her headstone helped him organize his thoughts and hear his own heart more clearly. The evening was cool, with the first hints of autumn in the air. Sarah's grave was marked by a simple granite stone that bore her name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Wife and Mother." Marcus had wanted to add more, but the cost of extra lettering had been beyond their means at the time. "Hey, baby," he said, settling onto the small bench he'd placed beside her grave the year before. "I wish you were here to help me figure this out." He told her about Victoria Sterling, about the job offer, about Emma's excitement at the possibility of change. As he spoke, he could almost hear Sarah's responses, her gentle teasing about his tendency to overthink things, her practical questions about benefits and opportunities for advancement, her unwavering belief in his capabilities. "I'll keep thinking about what she said," Marcus continued, addressing the gathering dusk as much as Sarah's memory. "About recognizing talent. I never thought of myself as having talent, just a willingness to work hard. But maybe that's what she saw. Someone who won't give up, who'll figure out how to make things work." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree that shaded Sarah's grave, and Marcus chose to interpret it as encouragement. Sarah had never been one to let fear make their decisions for them. When they'd gotten married young, when they'd decided to have Emma, despite their limited finances, when she'd fought her illness with every ounce of strength she possessed, Sarah had always chosen hope over fear. "If I take this job," he said quietly, "I want you to know it's not about forgetting you or replacing what we had. It's about building the kind of life you wanted for Emma, the kind of life where she can dream of being a doctor and actually have a chance to make it happen." Walking home through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The weight of constant worry about money, about Emma's future, about whether he was enough. It was still there, but it felt more manageable now. Victoria Sterling had offered them a chance at something better, and his pride shouldn't be allowed to stand in the way of Emma's opportunities. When he returned to the apartment, he found Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, her marine biology book open across her chest. The job offer documents were neatly stacked on the coffee table, and on top of them was a piece of construction paper with Emma's careful handwriting. "Reasons Daddy should take the new job." Marcus picked up the list, his throat tightening as he read Emma's 8-year-old logic. "More money for food and clothes. Health insurance so we can go to the doctor when we're sick. Victoria is nice and needs Daddy's help. Mommy would want us to. Be brave. I could learn about the building waterfall. Daddy would be happier." The last item hit him the hardest. He'd thought he'd been hiding his stress and exhaustion from Emma, but clearly his 8-year-old daughter was more observant than he'd realized. The idea that she'd been worrying about his happiness made his chest ache with love and determination. Next morning, Marcus called in sick to the warehouse for the first time in over a year. He spent the day researching Sterling Industries online, reading about their corporate culture, their community involvement programs, and their reputation as an employer. Everything he found reinforced Victoria's claims about the company's values and treatment of employees. He also spent time on the phone with Emma's school, learning about their policy for schedule changes and confirming that the new arrangement would work with their after-school program if needed. The more practical details he worked out, the more real the opportunity became. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and made his decision. He thought about the conversation he'd have with his co-workers at the warehouse, particularly Joe, who'd become something of a mentor and friend. He thought about leaving the familiar routine that had sustained them through the worst period of their lives, but mostly he thought about the school supply list that Emma had brought home the previous week, the one that included items he couldn't afford, dreams he couldn't fund, opportunities he couldn't provide on a warehouse worker's salary. The crumpled paper sat in the kitchen drawer like an accusation, a reminder of all the ways he was failing to give his daughter the life her mother had dreamed of for her. Marcus pulled out his phone and found Victoria Sterling's business card. It was nearly 10 o'clock, but she'd told him to call whenever he'd made his decision. The phone rang twice before her familiar voice answered. "Marcus, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "I wanted to let you know I'd like to accept the position." There was a moment of silence, and when Victoria spoke again, he could hear the smile in her voice. "I was hoping you'd say that. We can discuss details tomorrow, but Marcus, thank you. You won't regret this decision." After he hung up, Marcus sat in the quiet of his small apartment, feeling as if he'd just stepped off a cliff into open air. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but for the first time in 2 years, he felt like he was moving toward something instead of just surviving each day as it came. Emma's list still lay on the coffee table, and Marcus added an item of his own at the bottom: 7 new beginnings. Marcus's first day at Sterling Industries began at 6:30 in the morning, with a shower that used the last of their hot water and a breakfast shared with Emma, who was more excited about his new job than he was. She'd insisted on packing his lunch in her Disney Princess lunchbox, declaring that it would bring him good luck. "Remember, Daddy," she said, as she straightened his tie, the only one he owned, purchased years ago for Sarah's funeral. "Victoria said, you're like a building superhero. That means you have to be brave." The Sterling Industries corporate campus was a world away from the industrial district where Marcus had spent the last 18 months. Glass towers reached toward the sky, surrounded by manicured gardens and fountains that probably cost more than his annual salary at the warehouse. As he walked through the lobby, his reflection in the polished marble floors reminded him that he was stepping into a universe where everything from the coffee machines to the elevator music spoke of wealth and success. Victoria met him at the security desk, looking every inch the powerful CEO in a tailored navy suit, yet her smile was warm and genuine. "Ready for the grand tour?" The facilities department occupied an entire floor of the main building, with offices overlooking the corporate courtyard and the famous atrium Emma had asked about. Marcus's new workspace was modest but professional: a desk with a computer, a phone, and a nameplate that read "Marcus Thompson Facilities Coordinator" in crisp black lettering. "This is real," he murmured, running his fingers over the brass nameplate. "Very real," Victoria confirmed, "and well-deserved." The morning was spent in meetings with department heads, learning about building systems, safety protocols, and the complex logistics of maintaining a campus that housed over 3,000 employees. Marcus found himself taking detailed notes, asking practical questions, and gradually realizing that many of the challenges were simply larger versions of problems he'd solved at the warehouse. "Your predecessor left excellent documentation," explained Janet Walsh, the outgoing facilities manager who was retiring after 25 years. "But the real learning happens when systems break down and you have to think on your feet." As if summoned by her words, Marcus's radio crackled with an urgent message. The main elevator in the East Tower was stuck between floors with 6 people inside, including 2 members of the board of directors. "Baptism by fire," Janet said with a knowing smile. "Think you're up for it." Marcus felt the familiar calm that descended whenever he faced a practical problem that needed solving. This was what he understood: mechanical systems, logical troubleshooting, finding solutions under pressure. Let's go take a look. Within 30 minutes, Marcus had diagnosed the problem as a simple sensor malfunction, coordinated with the elevator, maintenance company, and personally reassured the trapped passengers through the emergency communication system. His calm, professional demeanor and clear explanations had prevented panic and demonstrated exactly the kind of practical leadership Victoria had seen in him during their first encounter. "Impressive," said Richard Chen, Victoria's COO, who had witnessed the entire incident. "Most people would have panicked or immediately called for outside help. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one," Marcus replied, unconsciously echoing something Sarah used to say about approaching problems with common sense rather than complexity. As the weeks passed, Marcus found his rhythm in the corporate environment. His natural problem-solving abilities and genuine concern for people's well-being made him popular with employees at every level. He remembered maintenance workers' names, listened to their concerns about working conditions, and found ways to improve both efficiency and job satisfaction. The transformation wasn't just professional. For the first time in 2 years, Marcus could afford to buy Emma new clothes when she outgrew her old ones, take her to dinner at restaurants that weren't fast food, and say yes when she asked for books or art supplies. The health insurance meant regular checkups for both of them, dental cleanings, and the peace of mind that came with knowing they wouldn't face financial ruin if one of them got sick. But perhaps the most significant change was in his relationship with Victoria. What had begun as gratitude and professional courtesy gradually developed into genuine friendship. She would stop by his office to discuss building improvements, but their conversations often wandered to topics far removed from work. Emma's progress in school, books they'd both read, memories of their very different childhoods. "You've brought something to this place," Victoria told him one afternoon. As they walked through the atrium Emma had been so eager to see. "People smile more. There's less complaining about facilities issues because they know you actually listen and try to fix things. It's not that complicated," Marcus said, watching the water cascade down the stone wall into the reflecting pool. "People just want to feel heard." "You'd be surprised how many managers never figure that out," Victoria replied. "Some people spend their entire careers trying to learn what comes naturally to you." Their friendship deepened when Victoria joined Marcus and Emma for dinner one evening at their new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a safer neighborhood with better schools. Victoria had expected to feel out of place in their simple home, but instead found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Emma chattered about her day at school, Marcus shared stories from work, and for a few hours Victoria felt like part of a real family instead of a corporate figurehead. "Victoria," Emma said as they cleared the dinner dishes, "do you ever get lonely in your big house?" The question caught Victoria off guard with its innocent directness. "Sometimes," she admitted. "You could come here for dinner more often," Emma offered. "Daddy makes really good spaghetti, and we always have enough for friends." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus and Victoria sat on his small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about their lives in a way that transcended their professional relationship. "I built my career thinking that success meant independence," Victoria said quietly, "that needing people was a weakness. But watching you with Emma, seeing how you've built this beautiful life together despite everything you've faced, it makes me wonder what I've been missing." "You haven't missed anything," Marcus said. "You've just been focused on different things, but it's never too late to change focus." As autumn deepened into winter, their friendship continued to evolve. Victoria found herself looking forward to their conversations, to Emma's impromptu visits to her office, to the warmth and authenticity that had been missing from her carefully controlled corporate existence. For Marcus, Victoria represented not just opportunity, but understanding, someone who appreciated both his capabilities and his devotion to his daughter. The brass nameplate on his desk had become more than just identification. It represented his transformation from a man barely surviving to someone building a future. But more than that, it symbolized his place in a world where his efforts were valued, where his character mattered, and where the simple act of caring but people could lead to profound professional success. In quiet moments, Marcus would touch the nameplate and remember Victoria's words about recognizing talent. Perhaps talent wasn't just about skills or education. Perhaps it was about approaching life with integrity, compassion, and the willingness to help others, whether they were strangers having heart attacks on busy sidewalks or co-workers dealing with broken elevators and everyday frustrations. The nameplate bore his name, but it represented something larger: the possibility of redemption, second chances, and the unexpected ways that lives could intersect and transform each other through simple acts of human kindness. The quarterly board meeting was running long, as they often did when directors debated projections and strategic initiatives. Victoria sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, listening to arguments about market expansion while mentally reviewing her afternoon schedule. She had promised Emma she'd attend her school's science fair, and Marcus was expecting her feedback on his proposal for upgrading the building's HVAC systems. "Victoria, what's your position on the Southeast Asian market penetration?" asked Board Member Harrison Mills, his voice cutting through her distraction. She began to respond, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. A familiar tightness gripped her chest, and suddenly the conference room felt unbearably warm. The faces around the table blurred slightly, and she could hear her pulse thundering in her ears. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?" she managed, loosening her silk scarf and trying to control her breathing. "Are you feeling all right?" asked Patricia Jung, the board's newest member and a physician by training. "You look pale." Victoria tried to wave off the concern, but the pressure in her chest intensified. This time, she recognized the signs immediately: the crushing weight, the difficulty breathing, the way her left arm was beginning to ache. "Not again. Not here. I think—" she began, but the words dissolved as she slumped forward in her chair. "Richard." Chen was already reaching for the emergency phone as Patricia rushed to Victoria's side. But it was Marcus who appeared in the doorway first, having been walking past the conference room when he heard the commotion. For a moment, time folded back on itself. Once again, he was looking down at Victoria Sterling in medical distress. Once again, her life hung in the balance. "Call 911, he said calmly to Richard while kneeling beside Victoria's chair. "Victoria, can you hear me? I need you to stay with me." His hands found her pulse, steady but rapid, while Patricia loosened Victoria's collar and checked her airway. "Probable cardiac episode," Patricia said professionally. "Heart rate elevated, breathing shallow. Good thing you're here, Marcus." Victoria's eyes fluttered open, finding Marcus's face through the haze of pain and fear. Not again," she whispered. "Yes, again," Marcus said gently, taking her hand. "But we know what to do now. You're going to be okay." The ambulance arrived within minutes, and this time, Marcus didn't disappear quietly into the crowd. He rode with Victoria to the hospital, holding her hand, while the paramedics monitored her vital signs and administered medication. In the harsh, fluorescent light of the ambulance, Victoria looked fragile in a way that reminded him how the most powerful people could be reduced to basic human vulnerability in an instant. Dr. Williams was waiting in the emergency department, having been alerted by the hospital's protocol for high-profile patients. After Victoria was stabilized and moved to a private room, the cardiologist requested a meeting with Marcus in the hallway. "I need you to understand something about Victoria's condition," Dr. Williams said, her expression grave. "The heart attack she suffered 6 months ago wasn't an isolated incident. She has progressive coronary artery disease. Today's episode was what we call unstable angina, essentially a warning that her condition is deteriorating." Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. What does that mean exactly? It means the lifestyle changes we discussed after her first heart attack haven't been sufficient. The stress levels, the work schedule, the emotional isolation, they're all contributing factors. Without significant intervention, she's at high risk for another major cardiac event, and next time we might not be so fortunate. What kind of intervention? Dr. Williams handed him a confidential medical report, its pages thick with test results and recommendations. Surgery, multiple bypass grafts to restore blood flow to her heart. It's not without risks, but given her current trajectory, it's becoming necessary rather than optional. Marcus stared at the medical report, its technical language spelling out the vulnerability that Victoria had been hiding from everyone, including herself. The woman who commanded boardrooms and managed billion-dollar enterprises was facing a battle she couldn't control through determination and strategic planning. Does she know? He asked. She knows her condition is serious, but she's been minimizing the risks. Victoria Sterling is used to solving problems through force of will. This is one problem that requires surrender to medical expertise and significant lifestyle changes. When Marcus entered Victoria's room, he found her sitting up in bed, already, reaching for her phone to check messages. She looked up as he approached, and he could see the fear she was trying to hide behind her usual executive composure. "How bad is it this time?" she asked, setting down her phone. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed, still holding the medical report. "Dr. Williams showed me your test results. Victoria, why didn't you tell me how serious your condition really is?" "Because," she said, looking away, "I didn't want you to think of me as broken. As someone who needed to be taken care of instead of someone who could take care of others." The admission hung between them, revealing the insecurity beneath Victoria's polished exterior. Here was a woman who had spent her life being strong, being in control, being the one others depended on. The idea of vulnerability was more terrifying than any business crisis she'd ever faced. "You think I would see you differently?" Marcus asked quietly. "Wouldn't you? I've given you and Emma a new life, opportunities you wouldn't have had otherwise. But if I become a burden, if my health problems start affecting my ability to run the company—" "Stop," Marcus said firmly. "Just stop. Do you think so little of me that you believe I'm only here because of what you can provide?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back since the ambulance ride. "I don't know how to be weak, Marcus. I've never learned how." "This isn't about being weak," he said, reaching for her hand. "This is about being human, about accepting help the same way you've given it." Over the next hour, as evening settled, outside the hospital windows, Marcus and Victoria had the most honest conversation of their friendship. She told him about the crushing loneliness of her success, the way corporate responsibilities had consumed every aspect of her life, the fear that without her company identity, she was nothing. He shared his own struggles with accepting help, his pride that had nearly prevented him from taking the job that had changed their lives. "I want to be here for you," Marcus said finally, "not because I owe you something, but because over these past months you've become family to Emma and me. Real family, even if it means surgery, recovery time, possible complications, especially then." When Emma arrived later that evening, brought by Mrs. Rodriguez from their apartment building after Marcus called to explain the situation, she took one look at Victoria in the hospital bed and climbed carefully onto the mattress beside her. "Are you scared?" Emma asked with her characteristic directness. "Yes," Victoria admitted. "That's okay. Daddy was scared when Mommy was sick too, but he stayed with her anyway, because that's what families do." Victoria looked over Emma's head at Marcus, seeing in his eyes the same determination that had compelled him to stop on a busy sidewalk and save a stranger's life. But this time, it wasn't a stranger he was refusing to abandon. It was someone who had become essential to his understanding of family, friendship, and the unexpected ways that lives could intertwine and strengthen each other. The private medical report lay on the bedside table. its clinical assessment of Victoria's vulnerability, a stark contrast to the warmth filling the hospital room. For the first time since her diagnosis, Victoria felt something other than fear about her medical future. She felt hope, grounded not in denial or false optimism, but in the knowledge that she wouldn't face whatever came next alone. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had saved Marcus and Emma from financial uncertainty, but they were saving her from something far more dangerous. The isolation that came from believing that strength meant never needing anyone else. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations with doctors, surgical consultations and treatment decisions that would require more courage than any business negotiation she'd ever faced. But tonight, surrounded by the family she'd never expected to find, Victoria Sterling allowed herself to be exactly what she'd spent her life avoiding being: vulnerable, afraid, and completely dependent on the love of others to carry her through. The surgical consultation took place on a grey Tuesday morning that seemed to match the gravity of Dr. Williams's recommendations. Victoria sat in the cardiologist's office with Marcus beside her, both of them studying the detailed surgical plan that would either restore her health or present risks that neither wanted to contemplate too deeply. Triple bypass surgery, Dr. Williams explained, pointing to the coronary angiogram images displayed on her computer screen. We'll harvest vessels from your leg and chest to create new pathways around the blocked arteries. It's a complex procedure, but you're a good candidate. You're relatively young, in good overall health aside from the cardiac issues, and you have strong motivation to recover. Victoria studied the medical images showing her heart, the organ that had betrayed her twice now, its damaged arteries highlighted in stark contrast. What are the risks? Every major surgery carries risks, Dr. Williams said honestly. Infection, bleeding, reaction to anesthesia. With cardiac surgery specifically, there's always a small chance of stroke, heart rhythm problems, or complications that could require additional procedures. But Victoria, the bigger risk is doing nothing. Your next cardiac event could be fatal. Marcus watched Victoria process this information with the same analytical approach she brought to business decisions. But he could see the fear she was working to control. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages of the surgical consent forms, and he noticed she kept touching her chest unconsciously, as if feeling for the heartbeat that had nearly stopped twice now. How long is the recovery? Victoria asked. 6 to 8 weeks before you can return to normal activities, longer before you can handle the stress levels you're accustomed to. This surgery isn't just about fixing blocked arteries, it's about giving you a chance to restructure your entire approach to living. That evening, Victoria sat in her executive office long after the building had emptied, looking out at the city lights while trying to process the magnitude of what lay ahead. The decision itself wasn't difficult. The surgery was necessary for survival, but everything that surrounded it felt overwhelming. Who would run the company during her recovery? How could she maintain control while acknowledging that control itself might be killing her? Marcus found her there at 9 o'clock, having returned to the building to check on some after-hours maintenance work. Through her office window, he could see her silhouette at the desk, and something about her posture, defeated rather than commanding, made him knock softly on her door. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked, stepping into the office that still intimidated him with its expensive furnishings and panoramic city views. "Trying to figure out how to hand over the reins of a company I've spent 20 years building," Victoria replied, without looking up from the stack of documents spread across her desk. "Richard is capable, but there are decisions that require my personal attention, relationships that need maintaining, strategies that will still be there when you recover." Marcus interrupted gently. "Victoria, you're not dying. You're having surgery to fix a problem so you can live better. What if something goes wrong?" The question came out in a whisper, revealing the terror she'd been hiding behind practical concerns. "What if I don't wake up What if there are complications? Marcus moved around the desk and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Then Emma and I will be grateful for every moment we've had with you, and we'll carry forward everything you've taught us about courage, generosity, and how to care for other people. Victoria felt tears she'd been holding back for days, finally. Spill over. I'm so scared, Marcus. I've never been this scared in my life. I know, he said, remembering his own terror during Sarah's illness, the sleepless nights spent bargaining with a universe that didn't negotiate. But you don't have to be scared alone. The preparation for surgery became a family effort. Emma drew get-well cards with pictures of hearts surrounded by flowers, declaring that beautiful pictures would help Victoria's heart remember how to be strong. Marcus arranged for extended leave from work, despite Victoria's protests that he shouldn't sacrifice his career for her medical needs. You gave me this career, he reminded her. Now let me use the security you provided to take care of you. But not everyone in Victoria's world viewed Marcus's devotion with approval. 3 days before the scheduled surgery, a group of Sterling Industries board members requested a meeting with Victoria to express their concerns about inappropriate dependencies and the optics of her relationship with a facilities coordinator. "We're not questioning Mr. Thompson's character," Harrison Mills said carefully as he and 2 other board members sat in Victoria's office. "But there are people raising questions about his motivations, about whether he's taking advantage of your gratitude and current vulnerability." Victoria felt a familiar surge of anger, the same protective instinct that had driven her to succeed in a male-dominated business world. "Are you suggesting that a man who saved my life, who has proven himself professionally, and who is now supporting me through a health crisis, is somehow manipulating me?" "We're suggesting that the appearance of impropriety," began board member Catherine Reed. "The appearance of impropriety," Victoria cut her off, "is 3 board members questioning my judgment about a man whose character you've witnessed firsthand. For months, Marcus Thompson has shown more integrity in the time I've known him than some people demonstrate in entire careers." After the board members left, Victoria called Marcus to warn him about the questioning he might face. She found him in the hospital cafeteria, where he was having lunch with Emma before her afternoon visit to Victoria's room. "Let them question," Marcus said simply. "I know why I'm here, and so do you. If they think I'm after your money, they obviously don't understand that the best thing you've given me isn't financial. It's the chance to be part of something bigger than just surviving day to day." Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Why are people being mean about Daddy?" "Because sometimes," Victoria explained, "when people don't understand something, they assume the worst instead of trying to see the good." "That's silly," Emma said, matter-of-factly. "Anyone can see that Daddy loves you because you're family now, not because you're rich." The night before surgery, Marcus sat beside Victoria's hospital bed while Emma slept curled up in the reclining chair that the nursing staff had graciously provided. They talked quietly about practical matters: Emma's school schedule, work projects that would need attention, the post-surgical care plan that Dr. Williams had outlined. But as the conversation wound down, Victoria reached into her bedside drawer and withdrew a small velvet box. "I want you to have this," she said, offering it to Marcus. Inside was Sarah's wedding ring, the one Marcus had worn on a chain around his neck since her death, but had recently removed as his grief began to transform into something that honored her memory without consuming his present. "I can't take this," Marcus said immediately. "This belongs to you, to Emma." "I want you to keep it safe for me," Victoria said. "And if something happens tomorrow, nothing is going to happen tomorrow. But if it does, I want you to know that these past months have been the happiest of my adult life. You and Emma have given me something I never knew I was missing, a real family. Sarah's ring represents the love that made you the man you are. I'm not trying to replace that or compete with it. I just want you to know that I'm grateful to be part of the love that continues because of who she helped you become." Marcus stared at the ring, its simple gold band catching the soft light from the hospital room's bedside lamp. "Victoria, I need you to know something. What's happening between us? It's not just gratitude or convenience. It's not about the job or the security you've provided. You've become essential to Emma and me in ways that have nothing to do with what you can give us and everything to do with who you are. What are you saying?" Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter, then back at Victoria, seeing in her eyes the same mixture of hope and fear he felt in his own heart. "I'm saying that somewhere along the way, gratitude became friendship, and friendship became something deeper. I'm saying that if you'll have us, Emma and I want to be your family, not just during the good times, but through whatever comes next." Victoria's hands shook as she closed the ring box and pressed it back toward Marcus. "Then keep this safe for both of us, and when I wake up tomorrow, we can talk about what forever looks like for our strange little family." As dawn approached, Marcus dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable hospital chair while Victoria stared at the ceiling, trying to calm her racing thoughts. In a few hours, she would be unconscious on an operating table while surgeons worked to repair the damage that years of stress and isolation had inflicted on her heart. But for the first time since her diagnosis, Victoria felt something other than fear about her future. She felt hope, anchored not in medical statistics or surgical success rates, but in the knowledge that whatever happened in that operating room, she was no longer facing it alone. The scared, lonely executive who had collapsed on a sidewalk 6 months ago had been transformed by the same compassion that had compelled a stranger to stop and save her life. The ring box sat on her bedside table, a symbol not of endings, but of new beginnings, of love that transcended loss, and of the possibility that sometimes the most profound healing happened not in operating rooms, but in the quiet moments when people chose to care for each other without reservation or expectation of return. The surgery was scheduled for 7 in the morning, but Marcus and Emma had been awake since 5, sitting in the pre-operative waiting area while Victoria underwent final preparations. The hospital waiting room was filled with uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed designed to make anxious hours feel even longer. Their orange upholstery faded from years of bearing the weight of worried families. Marcus shifted in his chair for the 100th time, trying to find a position that didn't make his back ache. He'd spent too many hours in chairs like these during Sarah's illness, learning that hospitals measured time differently. Minutes stretched into hours, and hours collapsed into moments of terror when doctors appeared with updates that could change everything. "Daddy, your face is doing the worried thing again," Emma said quietly, looking up from the coloring book that one of the nurses had given her. She'd been working on the same page for an hour, carefully coloring a garden scene with flowers that she'd explained would make Victoria think of spring when she woke up. "I know, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about Victoria. She's going to be okay," Emma said, with the confidence that 8-year-olds sometimes possessed about things adults found uncertain. "The doctors are really smart and Victoria is strong. Plus, she promised me she'd see my science project when she gets better." Marcus smiled despite his anxiety. Emma had indeed made Victoria promise to attend the upcoming school science fair, where Emma planned to demonstrate how the heart pumped blood using a model made from plastic bottles and tubing. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on Marcus, his daughter learning about hearts while the woman who'd become like family fought for hers. At 7:15, Dr. Williams appeared in surgical scrubs to update them on the preoperative preparations. "Victoria is in excellent spirits," she reported. "The anesthesia team is with her now, and we should be starting the procedure within the next 30 minutes. "How long will it take?" Marcus asked, though he'd been told the answer several times. 4 to 6 hours, depending on what we find when we get in there. The good news is that her overall health is excellent apart from the cardiac issues. That's a significant advantage. After Dr. Williams left, Marcus found himself remembering the night Sarah had been admitted for her final surgery, the one that was supposed to remove the last of her cancer, but instead revealed how far it had spread. He'd sat in a waiting room, much like this one, holding Emma on his lap while she slept, trying to stay strong for his daughter while his world crumbled around him. But this felt different. Sarah's illness had been a battle against an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with or reasoned away. Victoria's surgery was about fixing something specific, something the doctors understood and had successfully treated thousands of times before. Still, the familiar weight of helplessness settled on his shoulders like an old, unwelcome coat. "Mr. Thompson?" A voice interrupted his brooding. He looked up to see an elderly woman in the chair across from him, her grey hair neatly styled and her kind eyes filled with understanding. "I couldn't help but notice you've been here since before dawn. Is someone you love having surgery?" "Yes," Marcus said simply, not sure how else to explain Victoria's place in their lives. "I'm Agnes," the woman said. "My husband is having his second heart surgery. Bypass like yours, probably?" Marcus nodded, and Agnes continued. 37 years we've been married. You'd think it would get easier, but every time I still feel like that young woman who fell in love with a boy who promised me adventures." "How do you handle the waiting?" Marcus asked. "By remembering that love isn't about avoiding fear. It's about choosing to love someone even when you're terrified of losing them." Agnes glanced at Emma, who was now sharing her crayons with another child whose grandfather was also in surgery. "Your daughter seems to understand that better than most adults." Around 10 o'clock, Emma announced she was hungry, so Marcus walked with her to the hospital cafeteria. The familiar smells of institutional coffee and pre-packaged sandwiches reminded him again of Sarah's final weeks, but Emma's chatter about her coloring book and plans for Victoria's recovery kept him anchored in the present. "When Victoria comes home," Emma said between bites of her grilled cheese sandwich, "can we make her soup? Mommy always said soup was good for sick people." "That's a wonderful idea," Marcus said, marveling at his daughter's capacity for nurturing. At 8 years old, she'd already learned that healing required more than medical intervention. It needed love, attention, and small gestures that reminded people they weren't alone. When they returned to the waiting room, Dr. Williams was nowhere to be seen, which Marcus took as a good sign. No news was better than urgent news, better than the grim-faced conversations that meant complications and uncertain outcomes. The uncomfortable plastic chair had become a kind of vigil station, a place where Marcus could sit and think about how much his life had changed since that day on the sidewalk. 6 months ago, he'd been a man focused purely on survival, getting through each day, paying the bills, making sure Emma had what she needed. Now he was someone with a future that included possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. "Daddy," Emma said, leaning against his arm, "do you think Victoria knows we're waiting for her?" "I think she knows," Marcus replied, pulling his daughter closer. "I think she can feel us hoping for her, even while she's sleeping." The plastic chair continued, its patient vigil, holding the weight of love, fear, and hope in equal measure. At 1:47 in the afternoon, Dr. Williams emerged from the surgical suite still wearing her scrubs, but her expression was calm rather than urgent. Marcus felt his heart skip as he stood up, Emma's hand immediately finding his as they approached. The surgeon together. "The surgery went very well," Dr. Williams said without preamble, understanding that anxious families needed good news delivered quickly and clearly. "We were able to complete all 3 bypass grafts successfully. Victoria's heart responded beautifully to the procedure, and her vital signs have been stable throughout." Marcus felt his knees weaken with relief, and he had to sit back down on the edge of the plastic chair that had become his anchor through the longest day he'd experienced since Sarah's death. Emma, however, bounced on her toes with excitement. "Can we see her? Is she awake?" Emma asked, her 8-year-old directness cutting through adult reserve. "She's in recovery now, and she'll be sedated for several more hours," Dr. Williams explained, crouching down to Emma's level. "But in about an hour, you can see her briefly. She won't be able to talk much because of the breathing tube, but she'll be able to hear you." As Dr. Williams left to check on other patients, Marcus pulled out his phone to call the people who needed to know Victoria was safe. Richard Chen answered on the first ring, his relief audible even through the phone's speaker. Mrs. Rodriguez, their neighbor who had offered to help with anything they needed, cried when Marcus told her the good news, when they were finally allowed into the cardiac ICU. Marcus wasn't prepared for how small Victoria looked, surrounded by machines and monitors. Tubes and wires connected her to devices that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every vital sign that proved the surgery had given her what she'd needed, a chance to continue living. Emma approached the bed with the Reverence Children show. When they encounter something they don't fully understand, but recognize as important. In her hands was the Get Well card she'd finished that morning, a hand-drawn picture of 3 stick figures standing under a rainbow with Marcus, Emma, and Victoria carefully labeled in 8-year-old handwriting. "Can she hear us?" Emma whispered to the ICU nurse, who nodded with a smile. "Victoria," Emma said softly, placing her card on the bedside table where Victoria would see it when she woke up. "We waited for you all day. Daddy was worried, but I told him you were too stubborn to let your heart stay broken." Marcus nearly laughed despite the gravity of the moment. Trust Emma to find exactly the right words, words that honored Victoria's strength while acknowledging her vulnerability. Over the next hour, Victoria began to stir as the anesthesia gradually wore off. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly finding Marcus's face beside her bed. When she tried to speak, he gently touched her hand. "Don't try to talk yet," he said quietly. "You've got a breathing tube. The surgery went perfectly. Dr. Williams said your heart responded beautifully." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, whether from relief, medication, or emotion, Marcus couldn't tell. But when she squeezed his hand weakly, he understood that she was trying to communicate something important. "Emma's here too," he said, gesturing for his daughter to move closer to the bed. "She's been taking very good care of both of us today." Emma held up her card so Victoria could see it. "I drew us as a family," she explained, "because that's what we are now, right? A family that takes care of each other when someone is sick." Victoria nodded slightly, her eyes moving between Marcus and Emma with an expression that conveyed everything she couldn't say aloud. In that sterile ICU room, surrounded by the sounds of medical equipment and the quiet efficiency of hospital staff, something fundamental had shifted. The crisis had passed, but more than that, the uncertainty about their future together had been resolved. When visiting hours ended and they had to leave, Emma kissed Victoria's forehead gently. "Get better fast," she said. "I have so many things to show you when you come home." That evening, Marcus and Emma returned to their apartment for the first time in nearly 24 hours. The place felt different somehow, not just because they were exhausted from the day's emotional marathon, but because they were returning as people who had faced the possibility of loss and emerged with a deeper understanding of what they meant to each other. "Daddy," Emma said as Marcus tucked her into bed, "when Victoria gets better, are you going to marry her?" The question caught him off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Children often saw things more clearly than adults, cutting through complexity to reach the heart of what mattered. "Would you like that?" he asked carefully. "I think Mommy would like it," Emma said thoughtfully. "She always said love doesn't get used up when you share it. It just gets bigger. And Victoria needs a family as much as we do." As Marcus sat in their living room later that night, holding Emma's handmade card that proclaimed them a family, he realized that his 8-year-old daughter had articulated something he'd been struggling to understand. Love wasn't about replacing what had been lost. It was about having the courage to build something new while honoring what came before. Victoria was going to recover. They were going to have a future together. And somewhere in heaven, Sarah was, probably smiling at the family her husband and daughter had chosen to create. 6 months later, on a perfect Saturday morning in May, Marcus Thompson stood in the bedroom of the house he now shared with Victoria and Emma, adjusting his tie in the mirror while trying to calm the nervous excitement that felt remarkably similar to what he'd experienced on his wedding day with Sarah nearly a decade ago. Today was different, but the emotion was the same. the profound gratitude of a man who had found love twice in one lifetime. "Daddy, you look handsome," Emma said from the doorway, resplendent in her pale blue flower girl dress. Her hair was styled in gentle curls, and she carried herself with the poise of a 9-year-old who understood she was playing an important role in creating something beautiful. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look pretty gorgeous yourself." Marcus turned from the mirror to face his daughter, marveling at how much she'd grown in the year since that day on the sidewalk had changed their lives. "Are you ready to walk down the aisle ahead of Victoria?" "I've been practicing all week," Emma said seriously. "Slow steps, straight back, big smile. Mrs. Rodriguez says I look like a princess." The wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden of Victoria and Marcus's new home, a modest house that struck the perfect balance between Victoria's means and Marcus's values. The guest list included Emma's classmates and teachers, Marcus's friends from both the warehouse and Sterling Industries, Victoria's closest business associates, and the neighbors who had become extended family over the past months. Dr. Williams was there, beaming with professional satisfaction at seeing her patient not just survived, but thriving. Agnes, the woman Marcus had met in the hospital waiting room, had become an unexpected friend and sat in the front row with her husband, whose own heart surgery had been equally successful. As the string quartet began playing, Marcus took his place beside the minister under an archway of white roses and baby's breath. His hands were steady now, no longer trembling with the nervous energy that had consumed him that morning. This felt right in a way that transcended logic, the natural progression of a relationship built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of love that had grown slowly and sustainably. Emma walked down the aisle first, scattering rose petals with the solemnity of someone performing a sacred duty. Her smile was radiant, and when she reached the front, she gave Marcus a small thumbs up that made several guests chuckle softly. Then Victoria appeared, and Marcus felt his breath catch. She wasn't wearing a traditional white gown, but rather an elegant, champagne-colored dress that complemented her auburn hair and brought out the color in her eyes. More than her beauty, though, it was the expression on her face that moved him. Pure joy, mixed with a peace he'd never seen in her during their months of friendship and courtship. Victoria had chosen to walk herself down the aisle, a decision that reflected her independence, while also honoring the journey that had brought her to this moment. But halfway down the path, she stopped and extended her hand to Emma, who joined her for the rest of the walk. Together, they approached Marcus, the woman who had learned to love again, and the child who had taught them both what family really meant. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with vows they had written themselves. Victoria spoke about finding salvation not just in Marcus's CPR that day on the sidewalk, but in his daily example of how to live with integrity, compassion, and courage. Marcus talked about how Victoria had given him and Emma not just opportunities, but hope, the belief that their best days were still ahead of them. When they exchanged rings, Marcus placed Sarah's wedding band on Victoria's right hand, while she placed a new band on his left, honoring the past while embracing the future. Emma had helped choose Victoria's engagement ring, a simple solitaire that reflected Victoria's new appreciation for understated elegance over ostentatious display. "You may kiss the bride," the minister announced, and when Marcus and Victoria kissed, Emma cheered loud enough to make everyone laugh, including the newlyweds. The reception was held in their backyard, with tables arranged under string lights and paper lanterns that Emma had helped hang. Richard Chen gave a toast about how Marcus had brought humanity to Sterling Industries' corporate culture, while Joe from the warehouse spoke about how Marcus had never forgotten where he came from, even as his circumstances improved. But the most memorable moment came when Emma stood on a chair to make her own toast, raising a glass of sparkling apple cider. "To my new mummy, Victoria, and my daddy, Marcus," she said with 9-year-old seriousness, "thank you for showing me that families can grow bigger when people choose to love each other. And to my first mommy in heaven, thank you for teaching Daddy how to save people's lives and how to love people's hearts. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus found himself standing in their kitchen, washing dishes while Victoria dried them, a domestic routine that felt remarkably normal considering how extraordinary their journey had been. The new family portrait they'd had taken the week before sat on the counter, showing the three of them in their garden, Emma between her parents with a smile that could power the city. "No regrets?" Victoria asked, hanging up the dish towel and turning to face him. "Only one," Marcus said, pulling her into his arms. "I wish Sarah could have met you. I think you two would have been great friends." "I think so too," Victoria said, softly. "But Marcus, she did meet me in a way. Every kind thing you do, every moment you show Emma how to be compassionate, every time you see the best in people, that's Sarah's influence in the world. She's part of what made you the man who saved my life." Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep in her new bedroom, Marcus and Victoria sat on their front porch, looking up at the stars Emma loved to count. The worn family photo that had lived in Marcus's wallet for so long now shared space. In a frame with their wedding picture, past and present existing in harmony. "What do you think happens next?" Victoria asked, her head resting on Marcus's shoulder. "Whatever it is," Marcus said, "we face it together. All three of us." In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the city. Cars passing, neighbors talking, life continuing in all its ordinary magnificence. But here on their porch, surrounded by the evidence of love chosen and families created through courage and compassion, everything felt exactly as it should be. The story that had begun with a stranger's heart attack on a busy sidewalk had become something neither of them could have imagined. Proof that sometimes the most profound changes in life come not from grand gestures or dramatic events, but from simple human kindness and the willingness to help when help is needed most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to care for each other and their community. But tonight, Marcus Thompson held his wife close, listened to his daughter's peaceful breathing through her open window, and felt grateful for the unexpected grace that had transformed them all from survivors into a thriving family built on love, second chances, and the enduring power of one person choosing to help another.